There is a particular kind of silence that happens in an office after everyone else has gone home, the hum of the servers, the tick of a cooling radiator, the sound of your own heartbeat suddenly loud in your ears. Eli Navarro knew that silence well. He had spent 11 months learning every version of it, the silence before a deadline, the silence after a mistake, and now, the silence that fell the night his boss looked at him from across a half-lit office and said, quietly, like it cost him something, "Can we forget the rules, just for tonight?" It wasn't a question about policy. It wasn't about the company handbook or the line item in his contract that said no fraternization between supervisors and direct reports. It was a question about two men who had spent a year pretending not to notice each other, standing 3 feet apart with nothing left to hide behind. Eli would replay that sentence for months afterward, in the shower, on the subway, in the sleepless hours before dawn, trying to decide if agreeing to it had been the bravest thing he'd ever done, or the most reckless. This is the story of what happened when the rules came off, and what it cost, and what it built, and why neither of them ever wanted the rules back. Eli Navarro had a rule of his own, long before he ever heard his boss break one: never fall for anyone at work. He'd made that rule at 24, after a breakup that had made 2 years of shared cubicle space feel like walking through wreckage every single day. So when he took the account coordinator job at Hardwick Vance, a mid-sized architecture firm known for restoring old buildings instead of tearing them down, he told himself it would be simple. Show up. Do good work. Go home. It was simple, for about 3 weeks. Then Daniel Cho became his direct supervisor. Daniel was 34, sharp-jawed, quiet in meetings until he wasn't, and possessed of the particular stillness of a man who had built his entire adult life around control. He ran the restoration division like a surgeon ran an operating room, precise, unhurried, allergic to chaos. Eli, who ran on caffeine and instinct and a stubborn refusal to overplan his life, should have clashed with him immediately. Instead, something else happened. It started with small things. Daniel remembering that Eli took his coffee black after 2 p.m. because sugar made him crash before deadlines. Eli noticing that Daniel stayed until the building emptied out, not because he had to, but because he didn't especially want to go home to an apartment that echoed. Neither of them said anything about it. They were professionals. They had rules. But rules are easiest to follow when nothing tests them. The test came on a Tuesday in October, during the Ashford building restoration, the firm's biggest project in 5 years, a crumbling 1920s theater that Daniel had been trying to save since before Eli started. They were the last 2 people on the 9th floor, blueprints spread across the conference table like a battlefield map, when the building's ancient radiator gave a groan and the lights flickered once, twice, and died. Backup generators on the west wing only, Daniel said in the dark, and Eli heard, for the first time, something almost like a laugh in his voice. Guess we're finishing this by phone light. They ended up sitting on the floor with their backs against the window, city lights bleeding orange through the glass, phones propped against a stack of drawings, talking about the Ashford Theater's original architect, a woman named Constance Reyes who'd never gotten credit for her own building, until midnight became one, and neither of them mentioned leaving. That was the night Eli understood he had broken his own rule without noticing exactly when. Daniel Cho had wounds of his own, ones he didn't hand out easily. He had spent his 20s trying to be the son his father, a rigid, disappointed man who had wanted an engineer, not an architect who played with old buildings, could finally approve of. He'd earned the promotions. He'd built the reputation. He'd also, somewhere along the way, stopped believing he was allowed to want anything that wasn't earned through discipline. Falling for his own coordinator did not fit into any 5-year plan. He watched it happen anyway. Watched the way Eli argued with him in meetings, not to undermine him, but because Eli actually believed the client deserved better answers than the easy ones. Watched the way Eli talked to the construction crew like they mattered, remembered the name of the security guard's daughter, laughed loud enough that people 2 floors down could hear it. Eli was everything Daniel had trained himself out of being, unguarded. It terrified him. It also, slowly, became the best part of his week. Daniel told himself the boundary existed for good reason. A supervisor who crossed that line risked the coordinator's career more than his own. HR complaints followed the person with less power, not more, no matter how mutual anything actually was. He'd seen it happen to a friend at another firm, a whispered relationship, a messy end, and only one of them still had a job afterward. So Daniel held the line. He was polite. He was correct. He was, Eli sometimes thought, almost cruelly professional, as if warmth were something he had to ration. Until the night of the blackout cracked something open, and Daniel started noticing he no longer wanted to ration it. They didn't call it anything, at first. They called it working late on Ashford. 3 nights a week became 4. Coffee runs became dinner runs. Eli learned that Daniel Cho, when he wasn't performing competence for a boardroom, had an unexpectedly dry sense of humor and a habit of drawing tiny, precise doodles in the margins of blueprints, buildings that didn't exist yet, cities he wanted to visit but told himself he didn't have time for. Daniel learned that Eli's easy confidence was armor over something quieter, a childhood spent moving between his divorced parents' houses, always slightly the guest in both, and an adulthood spent making sure he was never, ever a burden to anyone. Eli filled silences because silence, to him, felt like waiting to be asked to leave. "You don't have to entertain me," Daniel said one night, watching Eli fill a lull in conversation with a story about his roommate's disastrous dating life. "I like it when you're quiet too." Eli went quiet then, for an entirely different reason. It was, he realized later, the first time in years someone had told him his silence was welcome. He didn't know what to do with that except sit with it, and with Daniel, in the low light of the 9th floor, feeling something settle in his chest that felt dangerously close to being home. The Ashford project hit its first real crisis in November. A structural report came back flagging the theater's original balcony as unsafe, threatening to gut the historical integrity Daniel had spent 5 years fighting to preserve. He took the news badly, in the specific, controlled way people take news badly when they've never learned another way. Eli found him afterward, alone in the model room, staring at a scale replica of the Ashford like it had personally betrayed him. "You didn't fail her," Eli said, meaning Constance Reyes, the long-dead architect Daniel had quietly made it his mission to vindicate. "You're the only person who's fought for this building in 80 years. That's not nothing. It might not be enough. Maybe not. But you don't have to carry it like it's already lost." Eli sat on the edge of the model table, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You don't have to carry everything alone, Daniel. Not with me." It was the first time either of them had said something that couldn't be explained away as friendliness. Daniel looked at him for a long moment, really looked, the way he looked at a building before he decided whether it could be saved, and said nothing. But he didn't move away either. And when Eli finally stood to leave, Daniel caught his wrist, just for a second, just long enough to say, without words, "Stay a little longer." Eli stayed. December brought cold air and closer distances. Their late nights stopped needing an excuse. They started ending up on the same side of the table without deciding to. Eli would catch Daniel watching him mid-sentence, gaze softening in a way that had nothing to do with blueprints, and Daniel would catch Eli's fingers brushing his when they reached for the same pencil, and neither of them pulled away as fast as professionalism required. Neither of them said the word that was building between them, because saying it meant admitting what they'd have to risk to keep it. The closest they came was during the office holiday party, in the stairwell where Eli had escaped the noise, phone forgotten, tie loosened. Daniel found him there, 2 drinks in, uncharacteristically unguarded. "I keep telling myself this is inappropriate," Daniel said, quiet, honest in a way 3 drinks and one only made possible. "That I should transfer you to another team. Fix this the responsible way. Do you want to?" "No," Daniel admitted, and it sounded like it cost him something to say it out loud. "That's the problem." They stood close enough to feel each other's breath in the cold stairwell air, and for one suspended second, Eli thought Daniel might close the distance. Instead, Daniel exhaled, stepped back, and said, "Not like this. Not drunk, not at a work party, not where it could ruin you." He left Eli standing there with his heart hammering and the ghost of what almost happened settling over him like snow. The almost kiss changed the air between them, made every glance heavier, every silence louder. It also made Daniel retreat. He started keeping the door to his office open during their meetings, kept a careful arm's length, stopped staying past 6. He told himself it was responsible. Eli felt it as rejection. Did I do something wrong? Eli finally asked, cornering him by the elevators on a Thursday in January, unable to stand the careful politeness anymore. No, Daniel said. You didn't do anything. That's the problem, none of this is your fault, and if it ever comes out, you're the one who'd pay for it. Not me. I have tenure here. I have my father's name attached to half this firm's client list. You have 11 months and a job you're good at. I won't be the reason you lose that. Let me decide what I'm willing to risk. You don't know what you're risking yet. I do. Daniel's voice cracked, just slightly, on the last word, the first unguarded thing he'd let Eli see in weeks. I've watched this exact thing burn someone else's career down while the guy with more power walked away fine. I won't do that to you. I'd rather want you from a distance than watch you lose everything up close. He walked away before Eli could answer. It was the first time either of them had said the word, want, out loud, and it left the space between them entirely rearranged. Daniel requested a project restructure. It was subtle. Eli was moved to co-lead a satellite office 3 train stops away, officially to develop his leadership experience. Unofficially, it was distance, deliberately built. For 6 weeks they barely spoke except through email. Eli told himself it was fine. It wasn't. He missed the particular quiet of the 9th floor, missed Daniel's dry jokes and careful doodles, missed the way being near him had made Eli feel, for the first time in years, like he wasn't performing his own life. He threw himself into the new office instead, proving, mostly to himself, that he didn't need Daniel's proximity to be good at his job. Daniel, for his part, discovered that distance didn't dull anything. It just gave the feeling more room to grow, undisturbed by daily contact. He caught himself checking Eli's project updates for the sound of his voice in the writing. He caught himself, one night, standing outside the satellite office at 7 p.m., not going in, just watching the light in Eli's window and hating himself a little for how much better the city looked with that one window lit. He didn't go in. Not yet. He told himself he was protecting Eli. Underneath that, quieter, he knew he was also protecting himself from finding out what it would feel like to lose him twice. It was Eli's mother, of all people, who cracked it open. Visiting for his birthday, she watched her son talk around a subject for 20 minutes before she finally said, "You've been in love with someone you won't name for months. I raised you. I know the difference between tired and heartbroken." Eli didn't deny it. Instead, for the first time, he said it plainly, to himself as much as to her, he loved Daniel Cho. Not the safe, deniable almost something they'd been circling, but the whole complicated shape of him, the discipline that hit a tender core, the fear of being a burden dressed up as protectiveness, the way he made Eli feel chosen without ever needing to perform it loudly. "So what are you going to do?" his mother asked. "I don't know if it's mine to fix. He's the one who pulled away. Because he's scared for you. That's not the same as not wanting you." She said it simply, the way mothers sometimes cut straight to the center of things. "The question isn't whether he wants you, Eli. It's whether you're willing to tell him what you're willing to risk, instead of waiting for him to decide it for you." Eli sat with that for 3 days. On the 4th, he requested a meeting. He didn't request it through Daniel's assistant. He waited until the 9th floor emptied out, the way it had that first blackout night, and found Daniel exactly where he expected, alone, lights low, a model of the restored Ashford Theatre finally finished on the table between them, balcony saved after all, months of quiet fighting having paid off in a way Daniel hadn't even told him about. "You saved it," Eli said, looking at the model. "The whole thing. Structural engineer found a way to reinforce it without losing the original design. Took 4 months and more of my father's money than I want to admit. Daniel didn't look up. I would have told you. If we were still, he stopped. We're still something, Eli said. You just decided what, without asking me. Daniel finally met his eyes, and Eli saw, underneath all the careful control, something exhausted and afraid. I moved you because I couldn't trust myself not to ruin your career for something I wanted. That's not nothing, Eli. That's not me not caring. That's me caring too much to be careless with you. Then stop deciding for both of us what I'm allowed to risk. Eli stepped closer, voice steady even as his heart wasn't. I've thought about this for months. I know exactly what it could cost. I'm choosing it anyway. What I need to know is whether you're brave enough to choose it too, or whether you're going to keep protecting me from a life I actually want. The office was silent, the particular silence Eli knew so well by now. Daniel crossed the distance between them himself, this time, and said the sentence that would change everything. Can we forget the rules, just for tonight? Not the rules of the company. The rules he'd built around himself, the ones that said wanting things meant losing them, that love was a liability, that the responsible choice was always the lonely one. Eli didn't answer with words. He closed the last of the distance, and for the first time in over a year of careful silences, neither of them held back. They didn't hide it after that night, not recklessly, but honestly. The next morning, before either of them second-guessed it, Daniel walked into HR himself and disclosed the relationship, requesting a formal transfer of Eli out of any reporting line that touched his own. It cost him a project he'd wanted, a title he'd been circling for a promotion cycle. He didn't take it back. You didn't have to do that today, Eli said afterward, still stunned. I've spent a year doing the responsible thing at the expense of the honest thing, Daniel said. I'm done choosing between them like they're opposites. There were consequences, real ones, a few raised eyebrows, one senior partner who made his disapproval known in pointed silences, a transfer that meant new colleagues and new routines for them both. But there was no scandal, no ruin, no version of the disaster Daniel had spent months bracing for. Just 2 men, finally allowed to be seen. Spring came, and with it, the Ashford Theatre's reopening, the culmination of 5 years of Daniel's quiet fight, finally public. Eli stood at the back of the restored balcony, the one that almost hadn't survived, watching Daniel accept recognition he'd spent a career convincing himself he didn't need external permission to want. Afterward, standing beneath a marquee lit for the first time in 80 years, Daniel found Eli in the thinning crowd the way he always seemed to, like some instinct that had been building since a blackout on the 9th floor. Constance Reyes would have liked you, Eli said, nodding at the small plaque near the entrance, finally crediting the theater's forgotten architect. You gave her back her name. You gave me the nerve to fight for it publicly. Daniel took his hand, unhidden, under a marquee full of strangers. I spent so long thinking the responsible choice and the honest one couldn't be the same thing. Turns out I just hadn't met the right reason to prove myself wrong. A year after the blackout that started it, Eli stood on the same 9th floor, different now, brighter, no longer haunted by things unsaid, watching Daniel finish the last notes on a new restoration project, some other forgotten building waiting to be saved. You know, Eli said, leaning in the doorway the way he had 100 times before, you asked me to forget the rules for one night. It's been a year. Daniel looked up, and something in his face had changed permanently from that first careful, guarded man Eli had met, softer now, sure, no longer treating happiness like something that had to be earned in silence. Turns out, Daniel said, some rules were only ever meant to be broken once you found the right person to break them with. Outside, the city lights came on one by one, the same orange glow that had watched over them since the very beginning, no longer a backdrop to something hidden. But simply the light of 2 lives, finally, honestly, one.